in 2020. We won. We won. We did win. It was a rigged election.
Well, that was just last hour, right? We had that on live here with Donald Trump repeating the false claim, as he does many, many times, that he won the election, which he did not. But what was interesting about it today, as he campaigned in Michigan, he was making the comments just a day after the new evidence was unsealed in the special counsel's case against the former president. Jack Smith, the special counsel, contending that Trump committed crimes to try and stay in office. Let's get analysis on all of this from this woman, the great Misty Marris, trial attorney, joins us along with former federal prosecutor David Weinstein. David, I want to start with you on timing, and one of our first guests brought this up right away today, who's I've heard it from Republicans right away, and from Trump himself, that they're out to get him, and they're weaponizing the Department of Justice. Now, our correspondent Ali Bradley caught up with Trump at the first interview to get him to react to all of this, and here's what he said about that. Watch.
This was a weaponization of government, and that's why it was released 30 days before the election. And it's nothing new in there, by the way, nothing new. They rigged the election. It's pure election interference to get an incompetent person like Kamala. She's grossly incompetent. She's more incompetent than Biden to get these people elected.
David, explain the timing of the release from Jack Smith.
Their position is flat out wrong, Connell. If you look at the docket, beginning of September, Judge Chutkan set a briefing order. She said the government's pleading was due on or about the 26th of September. They filed it. They asked her to allow them to file an extra big brief. They then said, look, a lot of this has to be under seal. She gave Trump's team time to respond. And it was the judge who issued the order yesterday saying, I am going to make this public. And she'd already set the rest of the briefing schedule. The response from the defense is due about the 17th of October. The government's reply at the end of October. The defense can ask for yet another say on all this. So Jack Smith had nothing to do with what was released yesterday. It had nothing to do with the timing of the debate or the election or anything else. Everybody knew when this was coming down at the beginning of September.
All right, that gets rid of the weaponization argument. I want to talk now about the content of what was in the release, 165 pages. Private role versus kind of the official role of being president. Here's Smith on this quote-unquote private scheme. Let me read from the filing. At its core, the defendant's scheme was a private one. He extensively used private actors and his campaign infrastructure to attempt to overturn the election results and operated in a private capacity as a candidate for office. Misty, on the legalities here, is they're trying to, we had the immunity ruling, and now we're trying to say this was him as a private person.
Exactly. So there's three buckets that came out of the immunity ruling about when President Trump would have immunity with respect to these acts. So the first is unofficial acts. The unofficial acts have zero immunity. Then you get into what's called the outer perimeter. These are acts that he's done as president, which may cross over into his presidential duties. There, prosecutors have what's called, there he has a presumption of immunity that prosecutors have to overcome. And then you have official acts which fall under his presidential duties, which are immune on their face, no argument. So what we see in this brief is Jack Smith going through all of the arguments to say these acts were not taken Donald Trump as president. This was Donald Trump as candidate. And some very specific focus, Connell, on conversations and those tweets relating to Mike Pence.
Right.
There's a reason there's so much focus there. Number one, that's really critical to the prosecution's case because it sets forth this timeline of what Donald Trump knew and when.
On January 6th.
On January 6th.
Tweeting about Pence, someone came in, told him, according to prosecutors, about that, and then, he was dismissive.
Right, and then saying Mike Pence didn't do his duty, that's 2:24 p.m., and then all the way through 5 p.m., these different tweets that come out. So Jack Smith is trying to get over that presumption of immunity, which, by the way, the Supreme Court had said in its decision, Roberts wrote that that's the bucket that it's likely that the communications between the vice president and Donald Trump are going to lie. So there's a lot of focus on that, and that's because of those buckets that were set forth by that Supreme Court decision. The minute you get into private acts, unofficial, then there's no immunity, then the evidence comes in.
From the filing on what you're talking about, immunity presumption, once again, David, I'm reading from this, and then you can pick up on it. Nothing in Trump v. United States dictates such an outcome that would effectively bar any executive branch employee from providing evidence against a president who committed crimes in his private capacity. But concretely, allowing these independent acts of executive branch officials to be used in the prosecution would not chill any presidential conduct, and thus any presumption of immunity is overcome. David?
So he's working with the decision and the language that the justices used to help him couch his now superseding indictment. He's showing that, look, you can work in the executive branch, you can assist the president, but there's something called the Hatch Act, and that requires you to disengage from your official duties in this case, the executive branch, work as a private citizen, and come in and provide information. And so that's the type of evidence he's going to use here, because as the Supreme Court told him, you can't use evidence that would have fallen within, as Misty rightly pointed out, that bucket of presumed immunity for an official act of a president. And so that's why these private actors are now just that.
So let me ask you both the same thing then. I'll come to you, Misty, in a moment. But David, for you, I felt like I knew a lot of what was in here. If you watch the January 6 hearings and what have you, so all right, I know a lot of this. But what was the most important new revelation for you, David?
For me, it was the fact that they're letting everybody know that we didn't rely just on what people are saying. We looked at Trump's cell phones. We have a timeline. We have conversations that took place where people are now verifying these were private conversations.
They have more than the committee had, apparently. Like they have him talking to Bannon the day before on January 5th, for example, right? Is that what you're alluding to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why they laid it out in 156 pages, because they have to show Judge Chutkan these private acts so she can make a determination. No immunity. This case goes forward.
Right. Okay. For you, Misty?
So what was really important, and David flagged it, it's this aspect of the timeline. And the argument that Jack Smith is putting forward in this motion is that the intent to say that this election was not accurate, the intent to move forward and make that argument started well before January 6th, flagging communications that in every instance, it's very clear by prosecutors, this communication was with a private citizen. This communication was with somebody on the campaign. So establishing this timeline that predates January 6th, right, where allegedly Donald Trump says, well, even if the results aren't final, I'm going to claim victory anyway. And then that sets the tone and the framework to look at the remaining evidence that was laid out in that motion.
And supposedly he knew full well that he had lost also, which was alleged when he was talking about the Sidney Powell and others and saying all that, you know, the stuff she's putting out is crazy, again, was in the filing. David, I'm going to thank you, as always, for coming on. I have one more order of business with Misty. So thank you, David. Now, Misty, there's a story that's just developing here in the last while from Extra, the TV show Extra. They're reporting that the DA out in Los Angeles, George Gascon, is going to announce he supports the resentencing of Lyle and Eric Menendez. Thoughts? This
will be huge. And keep in mind, there's a habeas corpus petition. What is that asking for? That's asking to overturn the result of their original trial. The basis, there's new evidence, and the evidence relates to allegations of abuse by the Menendez father against the two brothers.
Right.
Why is that relevant? Well, that didn't come into the courtroom because it's evidence that wasn't available at the time. So now the question is, if we have a whole new trial, they're successful in the petition, they go to trial, they're serving life sentences, will they be able to establish a lower level crime where their sentence would have already been served because they've served over 30 years in prison? So a manslaughter type argument as opposed to a murder conviction. And so the fact that the DA is coming out now, before that habeas corpus petition is actually determined and saying, we support this, perhaps there's more evidence relating to that, more new evidence that we're not aware of.
You would think that would be the motivation, possibly. Again, speculations. We don't know anything more than what's in this report.
Yeah, we don't know about this, but the fact that the DA is going to be supportive of this, where in general, you would have a district attorney saying, well, no, a jury decided this case with finality. A life sentence is what they're serving. Now we're talking about, we don't need to go through that process. We're just going to resentence, and it's likely a resentencing would mean that they've already served their time.
Right, 30 years. Man, remember how big a story it was at the time, and now
Huge.
it could be another big story?
I mean, it keeps cropping up, and now with this most recent Netflix
Yes.
special, there's so many eyes on this case.
Wow, and there will be again with this development. We'll follow that. Misty, as always, thank you. She's always on top of the breaking news tonight.